Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Today we will be doing a full set review of the Bigby Presents Glory of the Giants mystery miniature boxes. These are spectacular miniatures, and I didn't have to paint them, so that's a win for me. These are all wonderful options if you're looking to spice up your gaming table and shelves to really wow your friends, if you have any. There are also a lot of trophy miniatures to be found in these boxes as well. Every single box you open will have at least one giant inside, so you're guaranteed to have a good time with all of these. There are 42 unique miniatures in total that can be found in these mystery boxes. There is a total of 30 medium and small miniatures, and 12 different kinds of brand new, bona fide certified giants to be found. But we will also be showing the different promotional miniatures, like the 5 limited edition alternate paint job ones, and the Death Giant Necromancer, so you have a lot of stuff to look forward to. So, without further ado, let's get started with the review. First up, we have a giant tick. There's a small group of macrofauna in these box sets, and this is our first. These pests are the size of your average boar, and are a painful nuisance to giants. Like ticks in real life, they cling to their victims and probe their heads under their victim's skin to suck their blood. This is shown in their stat block by having both a proboscis attack, which deals piercing damage, and a blood drain action, which deals 2d6 necrotic damage, or 4d6 if the victim is a giant. The tick regains hit points equal to the damage dealt. The giant tick has a challenge rating of 2, and mine seems to be removable from its base, which I don't know if that's what it's supposed to do, but unless I glue it in, I'll need to keep an extra close eye on its clear base, lest it gets lost forever. Overall, this particular miniature is nothing spectacular, but there's only so much you can do with a tick, so it passes for me, solid 5 out of 10. Next up, we have an Ettercap. These fleshy purple critters are spider-like in nature, being able to climb on walls, spin webs, and move among them too. They get along greatly with other giant arachnids, and never feel the need to be territorial. To them. Though they may look kinda goofy, don't be fooled. They have a bite and claw attack, not to mention they can ensnare their enemies with a web of their own making. They have a challenge rating of 2. As for the miniature itself, I really like it. The purple is eye-catching and I enjoy the mini's design. It's not overly detailed, but neither is the art in the monster manual. Overall, I give it a solid 7 out of 10. Up next, we have a Shrieker. A Shrieker is a human-sized mushroom which lets out an ear-piercing shriek when it either senses movement or a shift in the light hitting it. They aren't so much of a threat, having a challenge rating of 0, but they often attract other more dangerous creatures their way. They live in the Underdark, and when not screaming their caps off, they are indistinguishable from other giant mushrooms. I painted one of these in a previous video of mine. Here they are side by side. I did a more in-depth review on them and other miniatures that came out in the Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures Wave 21, and I highly recommend you check out that video, it's a good one. As for the miniature itself, it is definitely a mushroom. They got the colors very accurately though, so that's pretty good on their end. I give it a solid 8 out of 10. Up next, we have 3 Bugbears. It's a little odd why these creatures were added. I mean, I don't think they were even mentioned in the book as far as I know, but... Hey, hold on, wait a minute. These look familiar. Wait! These aren't new designs! They're just repaints of the Bugbears from the Warband set! Well, I guess it doesn't hurt too much. I mean, it's just 3 of 42, right? Alright, let's get into this. Bugbears are selfish goblinoids who insist to enslave other goblinoids to do their bidding. They were introduced as a playable race in Volo's Guide to Monsters and had a well-needed makeover in Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse, where they were given the ability to squeeze into small places. The average Bugbear has a challenge rating of 1. Up next, we have 3 different orcs, and wait a minute! Don't tell me. These are just repaints from another Warband set. It's almost like they had to fill in the empty space to meet the 42 miniature quota. It's a shame because after looking through the book, there are plenty of new, interesting creatures that could have filled in these spaces. creatures like the New Fomorians, the Echo of Demogorgon, or the Etten Ceramorph. I guess it would have made the box sets too cool and they'd have a tough time keeping them up on the shelf. I don't know. These orcs are all labeled as orcs, even though only one of them is actually a true orc. The first one is an actual orc. The second one is an orog, and a smaller than average orog at that. And the third one is a Claw of Luthic. The orc has a challenge rating of 1/2, an orog has a challenge rating of 2, and the Claw of Luthic has a challenge rating of 2 as well. The orc was made a playable race in Volo's Guide to Monsters. Alright, third time's the charm. Here we have a couple of hobgoblins that, oh come on. More warband repaints. Roll of 3, I guess. At least there are only 2 to be found this time. Now, what I found about these particular few warband repaints is that they don't seem to be particularly to scale with others like them in the past sets. In particular, the Bugbears and the Orog are significantly smaller. I guess they did this to make the giants in the box set look even bigger, but if scaling consistency is something you worry about, then I recommend you pass on buying these from the aftermarket. The Hobgoblin is the most civilized and militaristic of the goblinoids, and they have a challenge rating of 1/2, and, like the rest, have become a playable race in Volo's Guide to Monsters. Now I usually try to rank miniatures individually, but for these I'm doing all the warband repaints at once. Straight to the point, 2 out of 10. I don't think the miniatures themselves are bad, like I enjoy the Hobgoblins to a degree, but I just can't get over how they're just repaints. I understand that it makes getting a particular miniature that you wanted from the warband easier than just buying the whole warband, but it doesn't excuse the fact that there are just so many of them. 8 in total. 2 out of 10. Here we have a Skytower Goliath. There is actually no stat block for a Skytower Goliath, but it's safe to assume that most of these Goliaths that are found in these box sets are representing the different feats you can pick up from the book. This one probably represents the Guild of the Cloud Giant feat, which, among other things, grants you the reaction called Cloudy Escape, which, if an enemy hits you with an attack, you can use your reaction to give yourself resistance against that attack's damage. You can then teleport away up to 30 feet. To get this feat, you must already be at least level 4, and you must have the Strike of the Giants, Cloud Strike feat already. As for the miniature itself, I really like it. It's very unique and I really like its whole woolly appearance. It really reminds me of like a rock climber, or perhaps a guide through craggled mountains for your players to follow. I'd even go so far as to say it would make a great blacksmith with that big ol' hammer on its shoulder. Big fan of this miniature. 8 out of 10. This fun miniature is called a bag jelly. A bag jelly is an invasive ooze which likes to reside in the bags of giants, eating whatever organic materials that may be dropped inside. Giants will often keep their bags scrupulously clean to avoid attracting them, while others will actually keep them around to avoid thievery from small folk. The bag jelly has a challenge rating of 1 and can grapple its opponents with its pseudopod attack. As for the miniature itself, I really like it. The green really stands out and the miniature is overall a great design. Though my only gripe about it is it probably won't find a lot of use on your table regarding its very specific places it lives. Because of that, I give it a solid 5 out of 10. Up next, we have a giant lynx. A giant lynx isn't your ordinary lynx. Besides the fact that they are, in fact, larger than average, these creatures are most often found in the Feywild. They can speak both Giant and Sylvan and are typically neutral creatures. They are clever hunters who use pack tactics to trap their prey. Both Frost and Cloud Giants will sometimes adopt them as their own pets, and so long as the giant respects the lynx's intelligence, the lynx will be happy to use its magical gifts to their owner's advantage. Speaking of magical gifts, they have a special ability called Lynx's Sight, where they are able to cast Clairvoyance at will. Also, this is one of 5 miniatures in this box set that has an alternate paint job found in the limited edition promotional box set. Here the Lynx is white instead of blue, and they did that on purpose. You see, when the weather gets cold and snow begins to blanket the ground in the Feywild, the giant Lynx's coat changes to white so it can camouflage in the snow. This is shown in their stat block with their Woodland Camouflage, where they have advantage on stealth checks when hiding in both underground and snowy terrain. The giant Lynx has a challenge rating of 1/2. As for the miniatures themselves, I really like both of them. I can see a Druid making great use of these for their wild shapes. That or a fun little encounter when exploring the Feywild. I mean, they can speak, so I would use that in an instant. That, and I just really like the idea in general of a Lynx changing its appearance depending on the terrain it's in, and I feel like the miniatures really did that idea justice. Easy 9 out of 10. Up next we have a Goliath Trickster. Like most of the Goliaths in this box set, there are no stat blocks for a Goliath Trickster. Rather, I think it's referring to the keenness of the stone giant feat. That or an Arcane Trickster rogue subclass. The page where the art for this miniature is found says, Goliaths often adopt the habits and learn the magic of the giants. I suppose that can be interpreted as flavoring your Goliaths with the different backgrounds and subclasses that are presented in the book. Either way, I absolutely love the design of this miniature. It is easily one of my favorites, and I can see someone using this as, a bard or a rogue, maybe even a fighter with the armor and hatchet. Easily one of my favorite miniatures. I can see it being used in so many unique ways, even as like a hatchet thrower at a carnival. 10 out of 10. Next up, we have an Elf Druid Circle of the Primeval. Unfortunately, this is actually a subclass that didn't make the final cut for the Glory of Giants book. I am especially disappointed because I loved the idea of being able to summon and wild shape into prehistoric creatures. If dinosaur-themed druids still sound interesting to you, you still have access to the Unearthed Arcana version, which, to keep it brief, gives you the ability to summon the souls of an ancient behemoth and reincarnate it into a physical form. The higher level you get, the larger the creature can be summoned. It acts as a familiar to the druid without being able to actually cast spells through it. As for the miniature itself, mine was warped at the legs when I unboxed it, but that's no big deal. Just dunk it in some hot water, reshape, then dunk it in some ice water, and it should be all set. This miniature can work great as a PC, such as a druid, a wizard, or even a warlock. It could also be a great NPC as well. Because of the warping of the legs, I give it a 5 out of 10. Next up on our Macrofauna miniatures, we have a giant poisonous snake. A giant poisonous snake is exactly what it sounds like. A giant poisonous snake. Despite most other creatures found in these box sets having some kind of sentience, like the giant Lynx, this creature does not. It is simply a snake. It's the sort of creature to be found hiding in a jungle, or under the sands of a desert, or roaming the Florida Everglades. They have a challenge rating of 1/4 and have a bite attack which deals both 1d4 piercing damage and 3d6 poison damage on a failed Constitution saving throw. As for the miniature itself, it's a good one. I enjoy the texture on the miniature's scales. The paint job is really good too. You could really tell that they used that null oil to really make the scales pop. It would work great as a druid's wild shape, or even a Yuan-Ti's companion. Overall, a perfectly fine miniature. 6 out of 10. Next up, we have probably my all-time favorite miniature in this entire box set, the Goliath Chef. A Goliath Chef does not have a stat block. Rather, I'd imagine, because of its giant-sized fork, it probably represents the giant fondling background, where despite not being a giant yourself, you lived among them and grew up along with them. This miniature could easily be a barbarian as well, with the fork being a flavored weapon. No pun intended. Now, this miniature is especially special to me, because in an old campaign I used to run, I had a barkeeper named Biggs who was a Goliath Chef who I imagined to look just like this. Either way, I definitely plan to use these guys as NPCs in future campaigns. I say these guys because the Goliath Chef has an alternate paint job from the promo box. This one has a white apron as opposed to the brown apron the first one had. I personally prefer this one of the two because the apron is more prominent in my opinion and doesn't blend in with the Goliath's other clothes. Overall, I love both of these miniatures. They'll really stand out on any table you put them on, and I just love how unique they are. 10 out of 10. Here we have a Goliath Monk. Like the Circle of Primeval Druid, the Way of the Giant's Fist Monk subclass didn't make the cut. It is, however, accessible through Unearthed Arcana. In short, in earlier levels you can add different damage types to different attacks, like thunder damage. You can also acquire a booming voice eventually as well. This miniature can work great as an NPC, or if you ever want to play a Goliath Monk. There's nothing too special about this miniature. I mean, it is simply a Goliath Monk, though the paint job's really good. They have all the little details down, and it doesn't seem to want to warp at the legs and bend, so that's definitely some bonus points. I give it a solid 6 out of 10. Aww, up next we have a Giant Badger. Giant Badgers are like the name implies. They burrow holes to hide in and move around unseen. They are also known for their keen sense of smell. This is shown in their stat block by having a Keen Smell ability, which gives them advantage on perception checks, which involve smell. This is an especially important miniature to me personally, because in a campaign I'm in, the party has a giant badger as a pet. His name is Soup. Overall, another wonderful miniature to have as a Druid wild shape. The paint job is really well done for him being such a small little guy, and with personal bias included, I'd give it a 9 out of 10. Here we go. Up next we have our first dinosaur, the Deinonychus. The Deinonychus is a challenge rating 1 dinosaur, which lives in more tropical regions, like the island of Chult, for instance, from the Tomb of Annihilation. They're depicted with feathers, unlike most dinosaur miniatures WizKids has released. The Deinonychus only has a bite and claw attack, but they become awfully dangerous when they use their pounce ability, where you can be knocked prone on a failed strength saving throw. Once knocked prone, the Deinonychus can then use its bite attack as a bonus action. Clever girl. There, I said the line, now I can be happy. As for the miniature itself, I really like it. Once again, another great miniature for a Druid wild shape, dinosaur themed. That and the paint job itself is really well done. The dry brush on top of it all really makes the colors pop. Overall, counting my love of dinosaurs, I give it an 8 out of 10. Alright, up next we have a Dilophosaurus, aka my favorite dinosaur. I feel like I personally have gotten really lucky when it comes to the release of different dinosaur miniatures, from the T-Rex in Fangs and Talons, to the Quetzalcoatlus in Monsters of the Multiverse, and even the Plesiosaur coming out later this year in the Seas and Shores mystery boxes. Coincidentally, they just happen to be releasing my favorites. Even the Deinonychus comes pretty close to one of my favorites, but none compared to the Dilophosaurus. The Jurassic Park movies really obscured the image of what real-world Dilophosauruses were actually like, making them look more like small nuisances just waiting for Chris Pratt to come and choke them out, while in real life, they were pretty large in scale. I'm happy this miniature does its true size justice, where despite the fact that it's on a medium-sized base, it is using up all of that space. On the table, you better believe that tail is going to be hitting all the miniatures that are unlucky enough to be behind it. Now, in real life, they probably didn't spit venom from their frilled jaws, but in D&D, they added this feature anyway. I think it makes them even cooler in my opinion, and which is why, above all others, the Dilophosaurus is my favorite dinosaur. Okay, bias aside though, this is actually a really cool miniature. The design is spectacular and very intimidating as well. Now, including my bias, the paint job is also wonderful as well. I give it an easy 10 out of 10. Here we have a Firbolg Primeval Warden, which actually has a stat block in the book. Finally! Firbolgs who served Haiti, the giant goddess of life and nature, fall into two distinct roles that parallel Haiti's dual nature. At home, Primeval Wardens tutor the young, while when patrolling the borders of Firbolg communities, they are fierce hunters who guard against external threats and incursions. They have a challenge rating of 4 with spellcasting as well. They have such spells as Entangle and Commune with Nature. They have strong weapons too, such as a spear and a fire lance. Firbolgs were made playable in Volo's Guide to Monsters. As for the miniature itself, I really like this one. The cape is absolutely stunning and clearly had some black wash used on it. The shield is wonderfully transparent and the spear just looks incredible with the fire effects. That and its crimson hair really has this miniature stand out. I'm gonna be honest, I'm gonna give it a 10 out of 10. On the subject of Firbolgs, up next we have a Firbolg Wanderer. Firbolg Wanderers are Firbolgs who wish to pursue their own adventure and embark on a journey of their very own. So basically like any teenager ever, I guess. They have a challenge rating of 5 and many tricks up their sleeves as well, such as a Bewitching Bolt, which can deal psychic damage, and if the victim fails a charisma saving throw, they are charmed until their next turn. These little brats also have access to spellcasting as well, with such spells as Minor Illusion, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, and Polymorph. As for the miniature itself, I can see this being used as a very good player character for any martial class, or even a simple NPC. Regarding it doesn't tower over other miniatures like other Firbolg miniatures do, this could easily blend in with other humanoid, elf, human miniatures. That and the paint job's really well done. I really enjoy the tattoo on its right arm that holds the sword. It's a really good miniature overall, and I would like to use this as an NPC in one of my future campaigns. I give it a solid 8 out of 10. Next up we have a Goliath Giant-Kin. Unlike the other Goliaths we've reviewed, this one actually has a stat block. Goliath Giant-Kin are Goliaths who live alongside giants, and who adopt their mannerisms and personality. Eventually, they garner the giants' respect and are looked upon as their kin. Though they aren't part of the Ordening, the irrefutable giant pecking order, they often will act as though they share the place of whatever kind of giant they reside with, boasting to other giants who are beneath them and respecting those above them. They have a challenge rating of 3 and have a unique bonus action called Giant's Strike, where any melee attack each deals an extra 2d6 damage of whatever type of giant they are associated with, such as fire damage if a fire giant, or cold damage if a frost giant. As for the miniature itself, this is a great miniature. I absolutely love the paint job, the dynamic pose. It can work perfectly as any kind of player character, whether it be a martial class or even a Hexblade Warlock. I love all the little details just to help this miniature be so unique, like the little white stripe in its hair, and nevertheless the very unique lightning effect coming from the spear. Speaking of the spear, it is prone to warping, so that's going to put it down to a 9 out of 10. So, still pretty good. Next up, we have a Fire Rune Goliath. Long ago, giants created special runes which embody different elemental and magical properties, but we'll touch up on that more later. Some beings are able to harness the magical properties of these runes. This miniature represents someone who carved the fire rune into their sword, giving it quite a flair. Pun intended. This miniature could be used as a player or NPC who has a flame-tongue sword. For DMs, careful about using this as an enemy, lest your party fights each other on who's going to keep the cool sword. Overall, a very cool and unique miniature. Love that sword, love the translucence in it, and I just love the overall paint job as well. I give it an easy 10 out of 10. Up next, we have a Goliath Frost Rager. Once again, another Goliath with no stat block. I believe this one represents either a Giant-Kin who lives alongside Frost Giants, or a Goliath who has the Strike of the Giants feat. Either way, a very cool miniature, which can be used as an epic warlock or other caster. Once again, another great potential PC miniature. I give it a 7 out of 10. Up next, we have the big man himself, Bigby. Throughout Bigby's book, he takes you through his journey exploring giant kind. You may notice his spellbook is half the size of him, and that's because he used to be an average-sized humanoid. That is until he came across a fatal encounter with a giant, and by the help of his friend Mordenkainen and a druid, he was reincarnated into a gnome. He is the creator of the popular spell, Bigby's Hand, which he is currently using in this miniature. As for the miniature itself, you can probably get away with using this as a regular PC miniature, or maybe just a regular NPC miniature, but you can always throw him in as some fun cameo for people who actually read the book. This miniature is very small, so if you get him, don't lose him. You could even use this miniature as your friendly neighborhood wizard as well. Despite the fact that this miniature is super small, they did not skimp out on any of the good details, like the red in his hair and even the little emblem on the front of his spell book. The miniature overall looks wonderful, and for that I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. Up next, we have an Orc Wizard Runecarver. The Runecarver is someone who has devoted their life studying ancient giant runes and lost languages. If a character with this background is a spellcaster, they can acquire the background feature Rune Shaper, where a player can carve a rune into a non-magical weapon, armor, or piece of clothing, and embed a spell correlating with whichever rune was carved. The miniature itself is a very cool one. I love it when stereotypical races like orcs get a complete style change, like this one. I suddenly have the urge to play as an orc archaeologist who has this background. Food for thought, 9 out of 10. This angry-looking miniature is a Tiefling Fury of the Frost Giant. This miniature represents the Fury of the Frost Giant feature to the Strike of the Giant's feat, which gives you a resistance to cold damage alongside a Frigid Retaliation, where immediately after a creature hits you, you can retaliate with a blast of ice, dealing 1d8 cold damage. This Frigid Retaliation is represented well in this miniature, with the cut on her arm and her wailing out in response. As for the miniature itself, I don't see much use for it unless you happen to need an NPC who is injured and screaming. The design itself is pretty good, and the paint job isn't too bad either, and for that I give it a 6 out of 10. Up next, we have our first legitimate giant, the Firegaunt. Now, with these upcoming giant miniatures, we'll be exploring a couple of things, such as what happens when a giant masters the magical properties of a giant rune, and what happens if a giant dies in an unfortunate way, such as being poisoned or stabbed in the back. A Firegaunt is such a creature. The Firegaunt is an undead fire giant whose burning hatred and rage prevented it from moving on to the afterlife. It then reanimates with its wounds burning with a fiery malice and the skin looking as though it had been burnt. Their blood burns of fire, and they have a crimson ray where they emit beams of fire from their eyes, mouth, and wounds in a 30-foot cone which deals 7d8 fire damage on a failed dexterity saving throw. The Firegaunt has a challenge rating of 11. As for the miniature itself, regarding it doesn't initially look undead, perhaps it can be used as some kind of fire giant chief, or even Duke Zalto from Storm King's Thunder. I love the paint job on this miniature, and it really blends in with other fire giants around it. It is such a cool one. I think I'll give it a solid 9 out of 10. Next up, we have a Fire Hellion. Basically, when a fire giant studies the art of war and different wars throughout history, They often find an interest in the Blood War, the forever raging war between the devils of the Nine Hells and the demons of the Abyss. The fire giant then eventually turns to making a deal with a powerful devil for some of them juicy war tactics to use against their own enemies. In return, they are fated to be smiths in the Nine Hells when they eventually die. The side effect of this deal is that the corrupted fire giant takes on fiendish features throughout time, such as horns, cloved hooves, and even a forked tail. They have a challenge rating of 11. This miniature makes number 3 of 5 with an alternate paint job as well from the promotional box. Here, there's no big difference besides the fact that the crotch garb is purple. And besides that, there's not really too much of a difference between the two. Now, I personally prefer the red one, not because it remains on theme with the devil, rather because it just doesn't stand out as much as the purple, and the purple just kind of is a bit too eye-catching in my opinion. Seems another giant has died. Who do we have here? Ah, a Frostmourn. When a frost giant dies a tragic death, such as being poisoned or stabbed in the back, they can reanimate into a Frostmourn. The Frostmourn resembles a giant corpse which has glowing wounds of how it may have died. It roams the winterland seeking revenge, turning the living into frozen statues or blasting their enemies with frigid winds. Like in real life, however, revenge is not always the answer. Often, when a Frostmourn gets revenge, it's usually not enough to put its soul to rest, and they continue to plague the icy tundra, looking for more victims. They have a challenge rating of 10 and have a freezing touch attack, which can turn a creature into pure ice. This miniature actually makes 4 of 5 to have an alternate paint job in the promo box. There's a couple differences in this alternate paint job one, though they're more subtle. Changes such as its armor and dress turning more black and gray. And is it just me, or does the axe look a bit more glossy on this one? Besides that, there aren't too many differences. As for the miniatures themselves, they both have the same treatment as the Firegaunt, where if you don't already know that this is a Frostmourn, it can easily be used as a regular frost giant. This is once again another great miniature that could be used as some kind of chief of frost giants, commanding the others around to do its bidding. I really enjoy both of these miniatures equally. I give them both a 9 out of 10. Up next, we have a hill giant Avalancher. As mentioned earlier, some giants are able to master ancient runes which hold magical properties. When a hill giant masters runic magic, they often discover a close connection to the natural forces of earth and stone. The hill giant often becomes a leader among other hill giants, as none in their tribe can compare to their might. This applies with most giants who master runic magic. However, they only hold special powers so long as they have a rune carved. If the rune is smudged away or destroyed, the power the giant once held fades away. Above other new tricks the hill giant Avalancher acquires, their main attack is called Stone Avalanche, where they can summon a hail of giant rocks to fall from the sky, dealing 8d6 bludgeoning damage to those who fail a dexterity saving throw. The ground becomes difficult terrain until the giant's next turn. The hill giant Avalancher has a challenge rating of 12. As for the miniature itself, I really like it. It doesn't stand out too much among other hill giants, and if you were to somehow remove the magical effect in its left arm, it could just be an ordinary hill giant. I like how this miniature gives this blank, almost psychopathic stare, like it doesn't understand the power that it truly holds. You can also spot the rune that it's carved on its club, which is a beautiful little attention to detail. Overall, I really like this miniature. I give it an 8 out of 10. Next up, we have a Maw of Yeenoghu. Similar to a Fire Hellion, the Maw of Yeenoghu is a result of a hill giant who has made a deal with a particular fiend. Sometimes, when a hill giant is extraordinarily evil in nature, it attracts the attention of Yeenoghu, a demon lord known as the Beast of Butchery and responsible for such creatures as Nulls. A hill giant can consume an evil artifact, which then transforms the hill giant into a fiendish form, like this. That or, sometimes Yeenoghu will whisper to a hill giant whose hunger surpasses others. No matter how it happens, the result is a Maw of Yeenoghu. This rampaging monster can spit its fangs at enemies as a projectile attack. It can also use its goring charge, where it can grapple its opponents into its toothy maw. The Maw of Yeenoghu has a challenge rating of 10, and if that wasn't bad enough, it has magic resistance as well, just to make things worse. As for the miniature itself, I find it to be horribly ugly, but I'm not going to let that obscure my judgments. I think its paint job is very good for it primarily being a skin color. Usually they'll just choose one color for skin and just go with that, but there's clearly like a bit of purple mixed in there as well. And speaking of purple, I enjoy the purple and black spots on its different shoulders. Those really bring the miniature to life. Overall, will you find much use for this miniature? Probably not. And for that, I think I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. Up next on our list of dead giant miniatures, we have a Spectral Cloud. If a cloud giant dies in a, you guessed it, tragic or ill-fated way, the cloud giant might reanimate into a spectral cloud. At first, it looks like nothing more than a fog bank or thick cloud, but in the heart of it, you'll find an animated skeletal cloud giant corpse. Tales suggest, however, this is a fate cloud giants often seek. You see, if a cloud giant doesn't want to see an end to its already naturally long life, they can perform a ritual where its heart and soul can be fused with a cloud, creating a spectral cloud without needing to tragically die. Though this may sound like a fun encounter to throw at your players, do not be fooled. They have a spectral touch attack, which if a player fails on an already incredibly high constitution saving throw, their hit point maximum is dropped equal to the necrotic damage taken, which is 3d6. They have a beefy challenge rating of 13. As for the miniature itself, I really like it. There's not too much to be said, though I really like the dry brush effect on the whole cloud in the background of the skeleton. The chains hanging from its arms and the purple in its eyes, nose, and mouth really give it this ghostly appearance, and I love it. For that, I give it a 9.5 out of 10. Next up, we have a stone giant of evil earth. Stone giants live in deep dark caves of the world, rarely seeing, or having any desire to see, the surface and the sun. They are artists and skilled architects at heart, and see the surface world as a plane of dreams. Some believe this world has no consequences, and pursue destructive hobbies as a result, while others prefer to keep to their caves and stick to their craft. However, if a stone giant is particularly cruel, they may find themselves breaking away from the ordering to forge their own path and hierarchy. They often see the surface world as not a realm of dreams, but a nightmare that must be purged. They often turn to cults who have a similar agenda. Such an evil god to become a follower of would be Ogremok, the Prince of Evil Earth. This results in the stone giant becoming a stone giant of Evil Earth. They lend their power and act as muscle to the cult's operations. They hold weapons which crackle of thunderous energy and work to bring the surface world to rubble. The stone giant of Evil Earth has a challenge rating of 9, and can pack quite a punch with its Thundering Stone Club, which deals 3d6 bludgeoning damage, plus another 3d6 thunder damage. This miniature is also the 5th and final miniature to have an alternate paint job. The alternate one has a red scarf and crotch cloth instead of the brown one. I personally prefer the alternate paint job because I think it's more eye-catching with the red. These are very cool miniatures, and can even act as regular stone giants, or even a chief with its impressive stance and commanding presence. I absolutely love the paint job of it, and the runes carved into its armor really pop. Its club is also something to behold. I love all the gems that are jutting out of it. Overall, both of these are some of my favorite miniatures. I give it a solid 10 out of 10. Up next, we have a Cloud Giant of Evil Air. Similar to how Stone Giants become Stone Giants of Evil Earth, Cloud Giants who turn away from the Ordning will often find themselves in service of the Prince of Evil Air. They often find themselves taking leadership positions in the cult of Elemental Evil, who also find the surface world to be a plague. Cloud Giants who are dedicated to Evil Air adorn a magical vest with giant artificial wings made of rock feathers and enchanted to give the giant the ability to fly. They possess a powerful boomerang called a Storm Boomerang, or a Stormerang as I would have called it if I wrote the book, which I didn't. It deals 3d4 bludgeoning damage plus 2d6 thunder damage. On top of that, if you fail a Constitution saving throw, the victim gets stunned until the end of their next turn. The Cloud Giant of Evil Air has a challenge rating of 12. As for the miniature itself, I really like this one. The wings really stand out without standing out in a distracting way. You can definitely get away with using this as a regular Cloud Giant. That, and I love his maroon vest. It really gives off an Eastern European sort of look that I think really fits this miniature very well. The attention to small details like the small little beard he has growing under his chin and the fangs coming out of his mouth are also wonderful as well. Overall, I give this miniature a 9 out of 10. Next up, we have a Frost Giant Ice Shaper. When a Frost Giant masters the magic of a Frost Rune, they become known as a Frost Giant Ice Shaper. The Ice Shaper is a powerful Frost Giant which is granted unnaturally powerful dominion over ice. True to their name, they shape the ice around them to their liking. They hold such abilities as the power to summon icy armor around them, and use a Freezy Ray. Their main ability, however, that the Frost Rune grants them is the ability to summon ice elementals in the form of wolves. This ability is rightfully called Ice Wolves. They use the stat block of a winter wolf, but are elementals instead of monstrosities. The Frost Giant Ice Shaper has an intimidating challenge rating of 17. Because of its high challenge rating, it probably won't find much use on your table for your average party to experience. However, she can definitely pass as a regular Frost Giant or even one of their chiefs. I'm also happy the miniature doesn't have a weird messed up foot like the AI illustrated her in the book. You can tell now because the stat block conveniently covers up her feet. Just glad it didn't make it into the miniature, I guess. Either way, this is a wonderful miniature. I absolutely love the paint job. They went all out on details. It definitely deserves its title as a rare miniature in the box sets. This miniature looks spectacular. 9 out of 10. Alright, up next we have the new giant on the block, the Death Giant. These giants, similar to Fomorians, are not actually part of the Ordning. You see, long ago, a large band of Cloud Giants broke away from the Ordning in favor of a life in the Shadowfell under the service of the Raven Queen. Throughout the centuries, the Cloud Giants disconnected from their natural connection to elemental air in favor of eyeshadow and an overall gothic aesthetic. Their bodies shriveled, and their skin eventually turned from a light blue hue to that of a pale purple. They still are the same size as their Cloud Giant relatives, but besides similar facial features vaguely alluding to their origins, they have nothing in common with their ancestors. Today, Death Giants haunt the Shadowfell. They hunt in both the Shadowfell and the material plane on occasion to find souls to please the Raven Queen. Though the base of this miniature says she is a Death Giant, I believe this is supposed to represent a Death Giant Reaper, which, in short, is a Death Giant that wields a giant neon scythe and sports armor which resembles the carapace of insects. they can drain the life and vigor from their victims. This is shown in their stat block with their Soul Bolt attack. The Death Giant Reaper has a challenge rating of 12. This is one of my favorite miniatures in this whole set, partially because it's something new and something giant, which both are pretty cool, but she's just a cool design in general. Her scythe looks absolutely amazing and perfectly matches the whole aesthetic this miniature has going on. She has a very intimidating presence, almost a confidence around her, and for that, I give her a 10 out of 10. This horrifying creature is a Barrowghast. A Barrowghast is the result of a hill giant who, can you guess it? That's right, died from an empty stomach. What did you think I was gonna say? Tragedy? Stabbed in the back? Poison? No. A hill giant only cares about one thing above all else: sustaining their appetite. The rage and regret for not picking up fast food on the way home might just be enough to infuse itself with the negative plane, reanimating the hill giant as a Barrowghast. The Barrowghast then roams the land with a newfound hunger. They no longer desire physical food, no. They hunger for life energy. With a nauseous odor, they hunt for victims to drain of life. Unlike the other dead giants we covered, Barrowghasts don't have a cool alternate form. They look like walking corpses. Their blood is thick and is like an oozing ichor. When they rise, they usually hunt down former family members and friends as some of their first victims, but when it comes to food, they don't discriminate. A Barrowghast has a challenge rating of 7. It has a life drain ability which deals 1d8 plus 5 necrotic damage, and if a humanoid dies from this attack, they instantly rise as a zombie who acts as an ally to the Barrowghast, but isn't under their control. As for the miniature itself, I have mixed feelings. They did so good at making a miniature look so bad. They abused the null oil wash to really bring out every crack and crevice and about it. I'd have to say my favorite part about this miniature is the stink lines or purple aura that's coming off of him. It really brings this undead feel that he's more than just a zombie, that he's like a zombie boss of zombies. Doesn't excuse the fact that this miniature is pretty darn ugly. I give it a 6 out of 10. Finally, for our final miniature, we have a stone giant Rockspeaker. You may notice a lot of crystals and gems on this miniature, and for that you'd be right. You see, stone giants study giant runes much more than other giants. To grow more connected with the stone rune, they adorn themselves with gems. When they summon the power of their rune, their gems and crystals they wear become magically infused with magical properties. They can then use these crystals to emit blinding lights which have unique effects on their victims, such as simply frightening the victims to searing their flesh. There are a frightening amount of things these giants are capable of, so I don't want to spoil it. I recommend you read the stat block yourself. The Stone Giant Rockspeaker has a challenge rating of 12 and a variety of prismatic rays, such as blazing red, dreadful blue, and sapping green. As for the miniature itself, I like it. I really like the rock donut on its back alongside with the funny gem staff that it's holding. That, and I like his little shoes. Stone giants are such abstract creatures in D&D that they can wear just about anything and still be a regular stone giant, so that's the cool part about this one. This one can just act as a regular stone giant if you'd like it to, because the likelihood that you'll introduce a stone giant Rockspeaker into an ordinary campaign is low. Overall, I like this miniature. It's a nice little cherry on top to all the miniatures we just covered. Whew, glad those are over. 7 out of 10. Yeah, when I said our final miniature, I lied. This is our last miniature, the special promotional Death Giant Necromancer, which is sold separately from the mystery boxes. I should have guessed. There is actually no Death Giant Necromancer stat block. Rather, this miniature represents what the book calls a Death Giant Shrouded One. Perhaps from the Raven Queen herself, or by other means, the Death Giant Shrouded One has learned the secrets of death magic. They collect the skulls from fallen giants and inscribe the death rune upon the prized skull. Unlike other death giants who are constantly geared up in armor, this death giant abandoned such protections in favor of dark robes. The rune magic creates a black scythe which summons the tormented souls of its victims as an aura of protection around the giant. This scythe is shapeless and ghostly in nature, as seen in the miniature itself. The Death Giant Shrouded One has a challenge rating of 15. They have wizard spells as well, such as Mage Armor and Tenzer's Floating Disc, which is kind of a weird choice, in my opinion. Oh well. Above all else, watch out for its Reaping Scythe attack, which deals a hefty 70-10 necrotic damage, which prevents the victim from regaining hit points until the end of its next turn. On top of that, if a creature reaches 0 hit points from this attack, they instantly die. No death saves, no nothing, just death. Cold, unfair, death. Giant. Death Giant. Ha, I see it now. This miniature, overall, is incredible. The texture on its robes, exquisite. The little tiny details that they added in are incredible, and I wouldn't expect anything less from this being the promotional miniature for the mystery boxes. From the spirits floating around her, to the ink black scythe, to even the small little details like the rune in the skull she's holding, this is truly the best of all the miniatures that we've reviewed. And for these reasons, I give it a solid 11 out of 10. Would purchase again. Probably not. It was really, really expensive. And here we are at the end of the video. Overall, there are a lot of great miniatures within this box set. I'm glad WizKids didn't increase the base sizes like they've been doing with the adult dragon miniatures. Instead, these miniatures match up very nicely with the other giants we've had in the past. All the miniatures seem to scale up pretty nicely with each other, and some are as large as my largest miniatures. This box set did a great job bringing out all the best from the Glory of Giants book, and I look forward to see what they do in the future. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, consider liking it. It really helps. If you want to deepen our bond, feel free to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified of our next upload. Until next time, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Club Kobold.